on now to some of your prescriptions in that film, because I think it's good ground for discussion. The most drastic one was when you said, speaking of an unemployed man, supposing you were cruel and took away welfare from this man, he would find a job at some wage. There would always be a job he could get. He might need some charity en route, private charity, but he would get a job. Now, I want you to react, those of you, before we come back to Milton on that. Is that a picture that seems plausible to you?
He may get a job, but he may get a job in what we refer to as the underground economy. And that's where a number of our youth are now going to get their jobs. Those activities that are illegal, and the only opportunity they have for earning part of a livelihood.
I think the other issue is that you have a whole group of people who are the single female head of a household. And yes, cut off welfare tomorrow. What will they do? What will be their immediate response? At what price to their small children and to their middle-aged children? Yes, they'll get a job. In fact, the statistics show that women, in fact, are the most successful through the employment program. But what has to supplement that, typically, is the provision of some kind of daycare arrangement. Either the individual woman has to earn enough money to be able to pay privately for her daycare, or in fact she is, quote, subsidized through this insidious corrupting set of programs run by the federal government, which in fact makes her employable and a taxpayer. It's an interesting notion of trying to get people in a productive mode.
Tom Sowell.
It's incredible the way you start the story in the middle, as if there's a predestined amount of poverty, a predestined amount of unemployment, and that the welfare system is not itself in any way responsible for that.
There is a predestined 20% of the bottom half of the population.
I have never, well, that's always been true.
There's going to be 20% at the bottom.
It's also true that 20% of the bottom population doesn't have to be living on the government and ruled by the government. You mentioned, for example, the female-headed household. Many of those, in addition to the grown woman who has all the kids, are teenage pregnancies. There's not a predestined amount of teenage pregnancy. I grew up in an era when people, and particularly blacks, were a lot poorer than today, faced a lot more discrimination than today, and in which the teenage pregnancy rate was a lot lower than today. I don't believe there is a predestined amount of teenage pregnancy, a predestined amount of husband desertion. Gutman has done a study of the black family, showing that this whole notion that the black family has always been disintegrating, that is nonsense, that his studies go up to 1925, the great bulk of black families were intact, two-parent families up through 1925, and going all the way back through the era of slavery. So it is now only within our own time that we suddenly see this inevitable tragedy which the welfare system says it's going to rush in to solve, but which it is itself a part.
We're talking about a very small group. We're talking about 12% of the families are not intact, are not two-parent families at any one period.
I mean among welfare recipients?
No, among the public at large. We're talking about 12% of the families. 12%.
That's right.
That's a small number. But
we're not of those on welfare.
We're still talking about a significant component of the bottom 20% that are the bottom 20%. Whether they are above the poverty line or below the poverty line, they are still the bottom 20%. And the issue is, what is the responsibility of the other 80%, if any, toward those individuals? Does your
program plan to eliminate there being a bottom 20%?
No. But it intends to raise the bottom 20%. So
you're raising them by having more illegitimacy, more unemployment.
I'm not making them have illegitimate children. I hope that's clear.
I think. You don't have to do that. You simply subsidize it.
We as human beings don't have a responsibility, but I hope we have a compassion and an interest in the bottom 20%. And I only want to say to you that the capitalist system, the private enterprise system in the 19th century, did a far better job of expressing that sense of compassion than the governmental welfare programs are today. The 19th century, the period which people denigrate as a high tide of capitalism, was a period of the greatest outpouring of eleemosynary and charitable activity that the world has ever known. And one of the things I hold against the welfare system most seriously is that it has destroyed private charitable arrangements which are far more effective, far more compassionate, far more person-to-person in helping people who are really, for no fault of their own, in disadvantaged situations.
I have to disagree with you, though, because I think that the whole notion of private property was excluded. Whole segments of society were excluded from the notion of private property in the 19th century, namely women, idiots, and imbeciles. And so I don't go back to the 19th century and hold that up as any paragon that we would want to replicate today.
Anyway, I want Milton now to come to your major prescription, which I know you don't say is on the agenda for tomorrow, but it lies ahead. That is the negative income tax. And I'm not sure people fully understand how it would work. We can't, I think, go into the details of it, but I'd like to get a reaction around the panel, first of all. Is this a viable approach to the enduring problems of poverty? Negative income tax.
I think it's a viable approach to some part of the problems of poverty. It involves, first of all, cash payments rather than in-kind payments, as I understand it. It involves payments on a non-categorical basis.
What do you mean non-categorical?
That is to say, it doesn't matter whether you're a female-headed family or a male-headed family, or whether you're young or old, whether you're sick or well.
If your income falls below a certain level,
it does pay some guaranteed income level for people based on family size, and then it has a take-back rate, which is modest, I suppose, by definition. Now, the question is how many things you want to use that program to replace. How many things you want to replace with such a negative income tax program.
Would you replace everything with, just to clear that point up, would you virtually wipe out the remaining forms of welfare if you got this program going?
Yes, I would not. I think its purpose is precisely to provide a transition between where we are now and where we would like to go, because because I agree with you that given that we've corrupted the people on welfare and gotten them on there, we do have an obligation not to throw them out in the street and put them in the difficult adjustment you've made. We've got to ease it off.
Sure.
And so, but I would want to replace all present welfare programs.
Now let's get reactions to this. We'll come back to you.
Well, I saw some figures recently which said that if you took all the money spent on poverty in the United States and divided it by all the poverty family, you come up with a figure of $32,000 per family. Now, the average poverty family apparently is not getting the $32,000. And so clearly someone in between the Treasury and those families is getting an awful lot of that money. And I think that if you simply eliminated the middleman, as they say in the commercials, that there'd be an awful lot of benefit both to the poor and to the taxpayers.
I'm supportive of the negative income tax concept and the objective of it. I'd like to point out, however, that administratively we have another bureaucracy set up. Somebody has to take into account earnings. Someone has to decide when to pay back that which they're entitled to. There's a time lag between the paying back, the earning and the paying back. There are a variety of problems in there that I will be prepared to accept, but I want you to know that government intervention is not going to be eliminated.
The issue that I have is, where do children come in? What are their rights under a negative income tax? And are we, by building in a negative income tax, in fact subsidizing the illegitimacy that Tom Sowell is so concerned about?
The major reason it is not feasible today to have a negative income tax is because the present welfare bureaucracy would be out of work. They are the major objectors, as Senator Pat, and he's now Senator Pat Moynihan then demonstrated in his book on the Nixon program. The chief obstacle to getting it enacted was a welfare bureaucracy. So that I don't believe these administrative problems, if you got it enacted, would be at all serious.
I think the other assumption under the negative income tax, and it's one that I'm not sure I can buy, is that everybody has a minimum level of understanding about how to spend money. In other words, how to use the marketplace to satisfy wishes. And I, as an economist, could say, yes, we do. Everybody from age 4 to 100 knows how to use money to satisfy wants. And that's the premise.
But they don't. There are all sorts of problems of people who are not going to be able to. But that's a minority problem. That's a problem for private activity and private charity. One thing is sure. They would be spending their own money, and that however knowledgeable you are about how to spend...
They would be spending my money.
They would be spending my money, but it would be one stage less bad. Right now, the welfare worker is spending Mr. A's money to help Mr. C. And there's a big takeoff in the middle, as Tom Sowell said.
The question is not whether people on welfare or on low incomes can all spend their money effectively. The question is, how effectively do they spend it as compared to how effectively the bureaucrats spend it for them? Comparing anything to perfection or to some arbitrary standard settles nothing. The same thing is true in the education area. They're saying, would families be able to select schools for their kids under a voucher system, for example? Well, the question is, could they possibly do much worse than the corrupt bureaucrats are doing in the public school system?
We're going on education in another program. Bob Lamb.
I want to quibble with something you said, Tom, about half of the money not going to the poor or something.